you mentioned two things, basically strength resistance training and
Hmm.
then more like aerobic cardiovascular exercise. So both are super, super essential for long-term health. So thinking about strength training first, when we engage in resistance training, so when resistance training is pretty much going to be bearing some type of weight and creating contractions in the muscles. So the easiest way to visualize this is just to do like, think about doing a bicep curl with a dumbbell or something, or even doing a squat.
You're listening to the Plant Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage. We're here to plant seeds on compassion to animals, your health, and the environment, and topics related to business that align with all three of those areas. Enjoy the show. Well, one more time, I have an amazing, amazing expert that I'm going to be having a conversation with about the plant-based lifestyle, possibly being vegan, about health and nutrition, and about his business. And today I'm talking with Coach Bryan Bell, who is out of St. Pete's, Florida. And I believe that's St. Petersburg. And he has done some amazing things because I've seen his before and after pictures. And he struggled with a lot of health issues at one point in his life. And then he discovered the miracle food. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So Bryan, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kathleen. It's super excited to be here and talk, all things plant-based and vegan. I love it. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And those are two of my favorite topics, as well as health and exercise and bodybuilding and all of that, because actually nearly 40 years ago in my 30s, I was a bodybuilder. And like many people, I got really involved in it. And then as I grew older, I got caught up in my profession. So we're going to talk about how do you help older women? Because I just hit 70 and I want to find out what can I do to make sure that I stay healthy. But let's start with your journey. When did you first become plant-based and why?
Yeah, so first was back in 2012 when I went vegetarian. And then I was vegetarian for about 2 years before I went fully vegan. And so really the first thing that really started the whole journey for me, and I even have to go back even further and say, like, I've been on the complete opposite side of the spectrum and I've done like the full animal-based diet, like beyond just your standard and like American stuff. And so I've tried that stuff, but it was probably like early 2012, and my brother and I were working a summer job together. My brother is like 17 months younger than me, and we're super close. We look super similar, so we have a lot of stuff in common. And so we kind of just decided that, at this point we were in our 20s, and I was just like, I found this website about like eating more fruits and stuff. So I decided maybe we should do like a fruit and vegetable like cleanse or detox. So we didn't really have a whole lot of planning into it. We just said like, let's just do fruits and vegetables. So it was me and a friend of mine and my brother, and it lasted about a good week. We were eating probably a lot less calories than we needed, so the energy kind of got a little low at the end. But over like 6, 7 days, I remember this exact moment where like we're sitting on his porch outside, and nice summer sun is hitting us, and I was just like, I feel like I am like connected to this sun, and it was just like this very freeing feeling because throughout that week, digestion was really good. Energy was really high initially, and then obviously like the lack of calories kind of hit, but it was just like this completely different sense of just being in my body, and really if I fast forward, 2 months after that, after we did that cleanse, our boss at the time took us out to eat. It was like end of the season, and he took us out to eat, and we ended up getting burgers.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I've never been like a big red meat person. I kind of grew up eating more like pizza and macaroni cheese and ice cream and stuff like that. But I got this burger and it just sat in my stomach for like the entire rest of the evening. And the next day I just felt so gross. And I was just at that point, I was like, I'm just done with all things meat. And around that same time, I was kind of going through my own spiritual awakening as well. And I was having like those just awarenesses of like, you know what, like animals, especially how like they're raised, through factory farming. I'm like, they're going through all this suffering and then they're being killed. And part of like I think the allure people have with eating meat when they're so used to it is maybe like the chemicals in the blood of the animal, like the adrenaline and all of that. That's just a little idea, but I just remembered like I don't want to bring that energy of
Hmm.
suffering into
Hmm.
my body anymore because I had that experience of what life was like with just like fruits and veggies, right? So at that point I was just immediately like I'm just going to stop eating meat altogether. So it was funny because at the time I didn't even know any vegetarians. I didn't even know what vegan was. I really did not. So this was like 2012. So was just vegetarian for the next 2 years. And then I ended up meeting my partner, my girlfriend, now wife, Jenny, and she was vegan. And she went vegan after watching the movie Forks Over Knives. So she all saw like the health benefits from it. And that movie like scared her straight. So she went vegan overnight after watching that. And so I remember we were eating at like this soul food cafe, and I was eating macaroni and cheese, and we were having this conversation, and she was really saying like, well, pretty much it's like the proteins and fats in the dairy and the eggs, it's from the same animals. So it's pretty much the same stuff. And that was like the big light bulb moment. And I was like, you're so right. It's the same stuff. So if I'm not eating, meat, why am I eating the dairy and the
Right.
eggs and stuff? So at that point, just like where I went kind of vegetarian overnight, I went vegan overnight. And it did take me quite a bit of time to really figure it out. And we can definitely get into that. But that's kind of where everything started. And, I've been vegan, at this time, November 2024, it'll be 10 years. So it's a nice little, probably should have a little party for that because 10 years doing
Absolutely.
anything. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm coming up on 6 years, and I actually produce a podcast where we've had the luminaries on the podcast and I've had many on my show too, but people that have been doing this for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And you're like, and I mean, some are still alive and they've been doing it for 70 years before there was such a name. So I think, 10 years is amazing. You definitely want to celebrate. And I want to kind of frame it into the difference between being plant-based and being vegan, because that's where a lot of people get confused. People will go the vegan diet, and it's really not a diet, it's a philosophy. But plant-based eating combined with being vegan probably is the healthiest way to go. And I definitely want to touch on the spiritual side of things, because I've been on my spiritual journey, gosh, for decades. And it wasn't until two things really I found helped me with my spirituality. One was recovery. I've been sober for 41 years. And the other one was when I
Awesome.
became vegan and identified as vegan and really got the connection between the sentient being. So talk to us, if you will, about the difference between being plant-based and being vegan.
Sure. Yeah. So ultimately, vegan starts off with the ethics, the side of it, just realizing let's pay attention to animal welfare and like let's try to reduce suffering of all beings, essentially. And that could even result in, so, obviously we're thinking let's not eat animals, but that could be like, well, let's not purchase leather. Let's not do anything and contribute to any of these industries, even if it's makeup and, hair care products that test on animals, all of
Absolutely.
that. That could even extend to saying like, well, I don't want to kill the spider and instead I'm going to put them in a little jar and take them outside, and that might be tough to do it sometimes, but if you have this energy, which really does start from that idea of, we're talking about more of a spiritual nature of realizing all of creation is really
Mhm.
one, right? All of this energy that, other beings, other humans, other animals, insects, it's all part of God, if you so choose to believe that, right? This energy of the universe, it's all one thing, essentially just taking life in different forms. And so to be able to look at like another creature and see some connection in that, it's pretty deep, right? But ultimately, when we think about vegan versus plant-based, we're thinking more of the ethics first. And some people do get into more veganism or eating better, eating more plant-based because of the health benefits.
Mhm. Mhm.
But at the core of it, we're looking at like an ethical thing. It's almost like really pretty much a belief system. Now with plant-based, generally that's going to be just food specific. So
Right.
there might not necessarily be, and I'm not really the type of person to be more activist based. I'm more like, let me draw people to these ideas versus let me, you know, I'm not the type to run into a restaurant and hold up signs to say, don't eat meat, right? I don't think that works, right? But if I can show, hey, you can be fit, you can be strong, you can be healthy, you can be all the things that you think you can't be if you don't eat meat while without eating meat. If I can show that, people can slowly start attracting to it. So generally with plant-based, it's more of the diet focus. So
Right.
let's remove animals out of the diet. And in some cases, it might not even be entirely, right? Plant-based for some people could be, well, I'm vegetarian, right? So I don't eat meat, but I do have eggs. So they might consider themselves plant-based. So that is something to consider about, because when we're having, any type of discourse between people, and even when you're looking at products in the store, you could potentially find a product that says plant-based and you turn it around, it's got eggs in it.
It's got
So
milk byproducts and eggs. That one shocked me when I learned that. So
yeah, so you really always have to look at the labels, but ultimately, they're all great choices, right? In my case, I'll work with clients that are anywhere from 100% vegan, like I'm not eating honey or anything like that.
mhm.
And then there might be someone who's more plant-based that's like, hey, I still have eggs occasionally or cheese. And then I even work with some people who aren't even close to that, who are still meat eaters, but I eventually get them eating more fiber foods, more fruits, more vegetables, and things like that. Because the reality is we're all different. And as much as I would just wish I could snap my fingers and say, animal agriculture is completely done, everybody's eating plant-based or vegan, I also accept where we are
Right.
today and just know
Right.
it's a transition, right? And it's
Absolutely.
it's going to take time and it's going very well. So I like to meet people where they are, and if, someone, is sticking with eggs and cheese in their diet, hey, that's okay. Of course, I offer alternatives,
Right.
but everyone's going to reach that, point in their life at their own time and their own pace. So as long as we provide options for people and show the different paths and the reasons why it's more beneficial, I think that's a solid win.
Absolutely. And I think one of the good outcomes from the whole COVID shutdowns and people going more online is there was more information that was spread around plant-based eating and around being vegan. And I think that was a real tipping point for the movement, if you will. Now, you mentioned your wife is vegan. How long has she been vegan?
I think it's like 12 years. This is a little
Okay.
longer than me. Yep.
Which
And
makes it easy. And I'm sure you have clients
yeah.
that you work with where one is choosing to eat really healthy, even identifying as vegan, and then they have a spouse or a partner or a significant other who's not. And it can be challenging because I'm in a non-vegan household. I am, my spouse is not. And that's interesting at times. So I
Mhm.
definitely want to cover that. But I know that you had some health issues before you went plant-based. What were some of the really more evident health issues that you were dealing with? And you were kind of like, I got to
Mhm.
say, a lanky, kind of scrawny guy. And now you look at your
Yeah.
muscles. I mean, it's for the people that are listening,
Yeah.
you got to go and look at his picture online because this guy is not a scrawny young man.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, like in high school, my high school weight was probably like 135,
Mm,
140, something like that. So I'm in like the 160s now. But back at the time, I kind of always, my body type always was like considered myself skinny fat. So like when
right.
I was a young kid, it was a big concern. Like sometimes I would be bullied for being, fat or chubby, and I was really confused about that. But when I hit puberty, got a little taller, and I pretty much found myself without really any muscle mass, but I
Mhm.
still had the body fat. And that really came from just like a really poor diet because my parents did not really eat healthy. They didn't have the healthy habits. So,
Right.
like I said, I grew up on pizza and Kool-Aid and ice cream. And, it's like they didn't know any better. They did the best they could. But ultimately, as I was kind of getting older, The biggest stuff that stood out to me was aside from just like confidence and things like that, but I did have some autoimmune things come up too. So I had alopecia barbae, so I was losing hair in my beard, and
Interesting.
I've had moments where I've been clean shaven, but I love having a beard, and that kind of spooked me. So part of the healing process of that was really cleaning up my diet, eating more whole foods, less of the processed stuff, and also giving up caffeine completely, to be honest with you. Like, I haven't had alcohol in the last 8.5 years,
Mhm.
3 years of no caffeine. So that's really helped. But a lot of my stuff has just been, just really just trying to like find that version of myself that I knew was always inside, right? The strong person, the fit person, really just trying to like live to my ultimate, potential. And like I said, I tried all the stuff with the meat-based diets. Um, what's crazy about it is one of the ones, the guy who created this diet recently passed away from a heart attack. So this was like a very high protein, very high fat, low carb diet,
Is that the
100%.
Atkins diet?
It was a kind of a version of it. It was the anabolic diet. So his
Okay.
name was
Okay.
Charles Poliquin. So
Okay.
huge like bodybuilder and like exercise science world. And I mean, I followed that at one point. I was drinking like egg white protein shakes, and it was just like, ah,
I got
I
to
was,
tell you, I got to do a
ugh.
little sidebar here because when I was
Yeah.
in my mid 30s doing bodybuilding and I was going to compete, and I had a trainer who had been a placeholder in the Mr. America, and he was a steroid freak. And I had just gotten into recovery about 18 months before that time, and he wanted to start shooting me up with steroids. And I said, I can't do that. And he goes, you'll never win if you don't. And I said, I can't. It goes against my recovery. And I'm really grateful for that. But at that time, I was blending up tuna fish and drinking tuna fish. I was doing everything that bodybuilders would do. And I mean, it definitely paid off at that time, but I don't know what I did to my system. And I had to go
Yeah.
through forgiveness of what I did to all the animals. I mean, we could definitely talk about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Like, I know people who do similar stuff, blending up chicken and stuff. And yeah, it's not really appetizing, is it? Right? Like, you might get your protein in, but it's kind
Kind of
of weird,
gross.
kind of gross. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, ultimately, I constantly had probably the biggest thing I went through was just I always had like digestive issues. It
Hmm.
just always seemed like could never get a handle on it. And even when I first went vegan, up until I got more into more whole foods and cooking at home and really trying to limit some of the processed stuff, it took me a while to get it under handle. So I dealt with that for quite a while. And when your focus and perspective is really just one dimensional, like say, how do I look, right? You kind of miss the boat on like how are these foods like actually reacting in your body. So in my case, dealing with the digestion stuff, you know, I've had, acid reflux and things like that come up at times, and then even like chronic pain and issues like that, which part of that goes into more of the exercise side with
Right,
strength
right.
training and posture and things like that. But I'd say ultimately finding that path of eating more clean, more whole foods, and being able to cook for myself is kind of taking me from like constantly just being like uncomfortable in your body when you're like not able to digest food
Right.
properly and you got bloating and gas and it doesn't feel good. So now I'm like, hey, no problem there. And it's been a complete 180. It really has.
Well, one thing that you said that I found interesting is finding the person within, and it's kind of like in the spiritual world. It's like I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Beckwith, but Reverend Michael Beckwith, phenomenal
Mm,
teachings that he has, and he talks about it's not that we discover anything; it's like we reveal what's already inside of us. And
mm,
so, when we go plant based, we get to reveal the healthy person inside. But you said something else that it as soon as you said it, I had a flash to when I go to the grocery store, how a lot of people don't look at themselves, because a lot of people, that those of us that have done bodybuilding, it was vanity for sure. It was definitely vanity. And how do I look? And always, like, do I look the way I should be looking in according to my standard? But you go to the grocery
Mhm.
store, you go anywhere in public now, and you got to wonder, are people even looking at themselves in the mirror? And if they are, what are they seeing? And I think that a lot of people avoid mirrors because they're getting heavier and heavier. And this is not about fat shaming. And I really want to emphasize
Mhm.
that. It's really about being heavy. And I've been in my 200s. I've definitely tipped the scale past 200 when I was
Mhm.
doing my yo-yo dieting. And people deny that that's unhealthy. They say, "Oh, I can be 50
Mhm.
pounds overweight and I can be healthy." And it's like, no, you're putting a strain on your knees, you're putting a strain on your back, on your organs, on
Right.
everything. And now there's type 3 diabetes. So let's talk about the whole
Mhm.
thing of people being in denial around what the excess weight will do. And with you, it was kind of the opposite.
Mhm.
You were skinny fat, but you were lanky, and now you're very muscular, and yet you're not,
Mhm.
like a beast of muscular. You look great. And again, I encourage people, go look at his picture if you're listening to this. But how do you address the whole thing with people who are in denial about excess weight being unhealthy?
Yeah, and I've definitely experienced that with, clients. A lot of clients I work with are some of the first things we might talk about is like, I don't want to look in the mirror. I don't look in mirrors.
Mm,
Like I walk right past. Like clothes don't fit good. I don't want to pay attention to myself. So there is that starting point of just like kind of denial, right? Of just like, I don't want to see what it really is. And, I think part of that is, we're not really educated very well about nutrition to start with. Because I remember when I was 13, and this realizing kind of where I was and like, oh, and I remember that first point when I discovered anything about nutrition and how food affects our body. I remember growing up, like, I didn't know that. I thought you just eat food and you just happen to look the way you look. So I want to say that first is just like if anyone's out there hearing this, it's not your fault, first of
hmm
all,
hmm
because we're not told this. We don't have nutrition classes. Even doctors don't really get much education on nutrition. So we're not told like, well, your weight all really comes down to how many calories you get. And if you eat more calories than you need, you're going to gain weight. And it
Right.
could be a little bit of muscle, but it's probably going to be fat, especially if you're not doing any type of resistance training. And just something like that, that would be cool to know when you're younger, right?
hmm
So I think a big part, and I did want to say too, I've been all the way up to like the 180s when I was back on that crazy big bulking diet. But when you add too much food in too quickly, there's only a certain limit of how much muscle you can gain based off of time. So I had gained probably like an extra 30 pounds of fat. Then I had to kind of cut that down. So I've been swayed back and forth too.
Right. Right.
But yeah, ultimately, it's just, I think just the root of it is understanding that the food that we put into our bodies is going to have a multitude of effects from how much weight we carry, but also how our bodies can process. Like, the more crappy foods, for lack of a better word, the more like refined stuff that's very
hmm
calorie dense and run through, tons of machines to make it taste good. That's just it's harder for the body to produce. And in some cases, if it's so refined, our body just comes right in and it goes right out, but we're not able to really utilize the nutrition in it. We're not getting the vitamins and the minerals.
Right.
And so I think what happens with most people, because I mean, I'll just bring it home and use my father as an example. And he's a big reason for why I'm here doing what I'm doing is, he actually has dementia now, right? So he's
hmm
going through
hmm
dementia. When I
Sorry.
was younger, yeah, thanks. When I was younger, he was at one point he had reached over 300 pounds, and he was completely lackadaisical
hmm
of the food. I mean, I've for 20 years I've been telling him about calories and nutrition labels and like let's choose this over that. Just didn't care, right?
Right.
Just didn't care. And so part of that, it's a lot to unravel there, but part of it is self-worth, right? And paying attention and like, how we're raised by our parents, and it's a generational thing. But ultimately, if we're not paying attention to like who we are, we don't have the ability or the option or the opportunity to change any of that. And if we just fundamentally look at the fact that this world and this universe works based on cause and effect, and your body and how you feel in your body is really no different from, like you said, if we're carrying extra weight, it puts more pressure on the organs to work. We become more resistant to insulin. So
Right.
when we eat carbohydrates, we might store them more easily. The extra weight puts more pressure on your joints. So now it's harder to walk. It's harder to actually just go about your normal day. And so when we see someone who's, in a little cart at the store riding around, it's just compounding the problem of the situation
You are
that they're
so
in.
correct. There's so much to unwrap here because the foods that we eat, the ultra processed foods, can cause depression. I mean, it definitely connected with
Mhm.
ADHD, autism. There's so many things that the foods are connected with. And when somebody's depressed, they don't feel like taking care of themselves. So it's really a vicious cycle that people are going
Mhm.
through. And I want to remind people that you're listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, and I'm here with Coach Bryan Bell. And we're going to talk about your coaching business very shortly. But I would like to know when you have somebody who has hit that point. I compare going vegan and really hitting that point of wanting to eat healthy with my journey into recovery, where I would try and I would try and I would try, and finally I just had to hit a bottom where I was out on the streets. I didn't have a home.
Mhm.
I didn't have any money. I mean, I was really in a bad way, and I just literally was taken to my knees. And I look at what it took early on for me to say no to that drink for that day, and then the next day, and the next day. And it's
Mhm.
the same with the foods that we eat because they are made by the food manufacturers to get us addicted. There is no two ways about it, the ultra processed foods. So,
100%.
how do you work with people, or how do you encourage somebody who says, okay, I'm done, I just can't do this, and yet they struggle? What are the strategies that you would give somebody that could help them
Mhm.
to get on the path to healthy eating?
Yeah, definitely the quickest thing, the more foundational piece of it is looking at the meals that we eat.
Okay.
So food, it can be just like this infinite thing, right? You walk into a grocery store, there's a zillion things to purchase. You go to fast food restaurants, there's so much stuff. But if we look at our meals, and generally we're probably all eating a dozen meals, maybe. Like, how much variety really is there? It's not like we're eating hundreds of different things.
Right.
We probably have some stuff that we like that's in rotation, right? So it's going to be a mix of stuff that we're going to eat at home and cook for ourselves. And that could be a mix of, it could be literally just like I'm getting rice and lentils and cooking it fresh. Or it could be, hey, I'm getting like the Hungry Man dinner and popping it in the microwave, right? So we have home stuff and then we have eating out of the house. So where I like to help people with at the first is I call these like power meals. So how can you create a meal that has got a lot of good protein in it, a lot of good nutrition, and it's very lower in calories versus being very dense in calories. So generally just speaking, that's a great place to start is just take a look at your meals that you constantly eat and just say, well, okay, what steps can I make to make this healthier? So the way I go about it is I look at focusing on your plant-based protein as the first
I'm
core of
glad
the
you brought
meal.
that up because a lot of people, the first question they'll say is, well, where do you get your protein? So let's really dig deep
Mm,
into where the protein comes from.
sure, yeah. So what's really cool is all foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, everything is going to have protein in it. Albeit a small amount in some cases, and they're all going to have all of the amino acids, so the building blocks that we need to create bone, skin, hair, nails, muscle, and all of that. However, certain foods are going to have a much higher concentration of protein than others. And because, we've kind of come a little bit farther with plant-based products and foods, there are some now that are almost entirely just protein, which is cool. So when we think about a normal standard American diet, we're thinking meat first. So meat is going to be your protein. And when we think about this, when we think about protein, it's good to think about it in the context of the fact that it's what's called a macronutrient. So we have three macronutrients, so proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So generally with a normal diet, standard American diet, it's usually some type of meat for the protein, and then usually what, like a couple sides or something like this. Even a McDonald's hamburger, you've got a hamburger with maybe a couple pickles and lettuce and tomato on the bun. So there's your vegetables, and then maybe some fries on the side. And it's either that or it's chicken or it's bacon or pork
Right.
chops or whatever, or seafood. So when we think about doing this from a plant-based angle, if we start with some higher protein foods, those are going to be like tofu, tempeh, edamame. We've got lentils, and then, beans, nuts, seeds, nutritional yeast. All of those are going to have protein as well. But I like to look at it almost as if like we've got a few top three or four that are like big contenders.
Hmm.
Again, American diet, you've got what? You're not eating 20 different animals, right? It's cows, chickens, pigs, and then seafood and fish like that.
Right.
So on the plant-based side, if we think about it like this, your soybean family is going to give you like tofu and tempeh, which are very high in protein. Then we've got all of our legumes like lentils, peas, and then like the beans all as well to add in. And then some of the other cooler things that have happened is there's some companies that are creating some really cool products. So there's a company called Big Mountain Farms that makes like a fava bean tofu, and it's like a
Mm.
block of tofu, but it's made from fava beans, and it's pretty much just a block of protein. It's cool. So I'll cut that and air fry it and have it with hummus, and next thing you know, it's 30 grams of protein. That's what some people get in an entire day
Right.
sometimes if they're not paying attention to it. And then there's also with peas, there's also like meatless crumbles or pea protein crumbles where they just basically pull out the fiber and it's just pretty much protein. So instead, it's a great substitute for like ground beef. So I'll make like tacos with it. Just add it in, mixed with rice and beans, and just bump the protein up. So that's like a really cool way. Those are two things, so they are processed in the sense that it's more of a mechanical processing. But the difference there is that it's a big difference between that and say chemical-based processing. That would
Right.
be like your Beyond or Impossible Burgers
Right.
and stuff. So I tend to just say, like, let's not even bring that into the equation. They're great transition foods for when you're like eating burgers and meat all the time. But ideally, let's get you to some more whole foods. So when we structure a diet like that and I focus on a power meal, let's just say I start with tofu first. So I'm going to start with tofu and then I'm going to add in some different bases. Like maybe I'm going to do a side of spring mix and a side of rice. All right, this meal's shaping up. Now I'm going to add in my favorite veggies. So that could be broccoli, put a little sweet potatoes in there, getting more nutrients and more vitamins and minerals. And then I can add some type of topping to it. So I love nutritional yeast. So if you're not already eating nutritional yeast, it's basically a dried fungus, right? So you pretty much, it's pretty much just fiber and protein. So you're now getting more protein. You could add in some pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds on top to give a little crunch, more protein, more fiber, healthy fats. And then we go into like a sauce or something like that to just kind of bring it together, which could be hummus, a couple slices of avocado, hot sauce, a little marinara. So within that meal, that power meal, I could just swap things in and out. So
Right.
instead of the tofu, I could add tempeh one day, or I could do the meatless crumbles. And instead of, say I could put lentils or I could do black beans one day. And then instead of the broccoli and sweet potatoes, I could do peppers, onions, and tomatoes. And so by doing it like that, if you're able to just say, like, well, what meals am I currently eating? Where am I missing out on protein sources? That's
Right.
probably the first place to start. So if you're currently eating a plant-based or a vegan diet and you're saying, well, I don't really pay attention to protein, it would be good to just focus on adding in tofu or tempeh or edamame beans or lentils. those would be probably your easiest ones to get started with.
Excellent.
And then you can look for some of those other things like the meatless crumbles and like the fava bean tofu and things like that.
Oh, that's
But
perfect. That's
that's the
perfect.
core. And then what I really go into after that is once you have a recipe figured out, then what you want to do is either double or quadruple the recipe and then put those into meal prep containers. So now that you've got four lunches and it took you a half hour to make, and so guess what? When you get home from work and you're super stressed out, instead of like, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich
Hmm.
or, calling up DoorDash and spending $30 and waiting a half hour, you can just take it out of the fridge, put it into like a saucepan and heat it up or the oven or whatever, and you're good. And you've got your nutrition set up. So it's like when you plan it that way, you basically are able to really not just get your protein goals, but just eat so much more
Right.
healthy food, but still maintain the convenience that we all kind of really need because, everybody's got a busy lifestyle, right? Stress is just a part of life. So instead of just trying to wait for a day where we're not stressed and we're not busy, let's just create a system for it.
I love that because a lot of people will use the excuse, well, I just don't have the time. It's like, well, you do have the time. You just got to adjust it, and it's about changing behaviors,
Mhm.
really. And so, Coach, where do people find you? What's the best web address for people to go to?
Yeah, so consciousfitness.io. So consciousfitness.io. Or you
Okay.
can check me out on Instagram. So that's where I post a lot of, you know, recipes, nutrition advice, exercise info, and that's just at Conscious Fitness. So again,
Perfect.
CONSCIOUSFITNESS. So
I
I
love
actually
that you
have,
spelled that out. Yeah, I love that because a lot
yeah,
of times people go, conscious fitness, and you're going, what did you just say? So thank you for that. And
sure.
and we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. But I'm curious because you had mentioned that when you first decided to try fruits and vegetables, you weren't really committed. You did it for a couple of months, and then your boss took you out, and you had some meat, and you felt terrible. What were you doing prior to becoming a fitness and a health coach?
Yeah, well, funny enough, I wanted to do this in my early 20s. I wanted to, be a personal trainer. And I think what the problem was is just that I had a big inconsistency problem, which a lot of us do.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time, I was like a college kid and like I would go work out for a couple months, try to eat well, and then I'd fall off. And honestly, what really changed for me was just finding the body weight movements and the body weight calisthenics and realizing I don't need a gym. I don't need a membership.
Mm.
I can literally work out in this room with just my floor and my body. So before this, I've always really been like an entrepreneur. So I started off doing, some marketing businesses when I used to be in a band back in the day. So I was running ads for other bands to get them followers and things. I was able to use some of those skills myself to play some like big shows and stuff, which was really cool. But for the most part of my life, up until I really got into more of the health and fitness business, I ran a videography business. So I was initially, my wife and I, we were doing lots of weddings. I mean, we filmed probably like 200 weddings in our
Mm.
career. Then started working with businesses, working on promos and things like that. So it's been cool because over that period of time, I was able to learn a lot of skills about marketing and reaching out to people and creating videos. And it was always fun. I've always been a very creative person. And I've been able to now utilize all the equipment that I still have from that and then be able to use this in this business now to more directly help people. So I went from pretty much helping people with something I didn't, I wasn't really passionate about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I got married last year. We had a small wedding. It was great. We shot video for it. We actually did it ourselves, set up tripods and had a couple family members take some video and
Right,
had a
right,
really good video from it, but it was never something I was like passionate about.
right.
Every time I was filming like a pretty much like a stranger's wedding, I was like, why am I here? I'm not doing anything this isn't something I want to do. And so I also got into music. Like I said, I've been a lover of music. I've made a lot of music, But there was always this missing piece of I've always wanted to directly help someone, kind of in the same way like I really wish I could have helped my father 20 years ago with his nutrition and taking him to the gym and doing that. So I really have kind of just found that path through, helping to coach people one-on-one because I'm able to directly actually help them attain real tangible results
Right,
that
right,
are sustainable and like it's like their health outcomes too. So sometimes it starts with, hey, I need to lose 30 pounds, but it ends up being cool. Like now I know how to be stronger. I have more mobility in my body. I can go do these new things I didn't think I could do, or I could feel comfortable taking my shirt off at the beach. Like all that stuff matters. And it creates so much confidence in people as they age because
right.
the majority of my clients are, probably 40s to 60s. I have some in their 30s. I even have a gentleman I work with who's 83, right? So
Wow. Okay.
there's no real limit to it, It's like as long as we're alive, we can continue to build strength
Well,
and increase
yeah,
our mobility.
and I want to talk about that because I know that in May is when I turned 70, and I know a lot of women my age, they've given up. They've kind of they've
Mhm.
accepted the fact that they're going to gain weight, they're going to have bad knees, they're going to have the surgery. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Doesn't have to be that way. And a few years ago,
Mhm.
I actually, by a freak accident, broke my wrist. And it was so interesting. It was 3 years ago. And when I had to go
Mhm.
first, I had to go have the surgery and meet with the surgeon. And in the waiting room, I just saw all these people that I knew the reason they were having knee surgery was not necessarily because of genetics. It had to do with the weight they were carrying because, for every pound you put on, it puts pressure on your bones. And so, with that
Mhm.
being said, when I went through the whole recovery and the PT, initially they thought it was my age for the reason that I broke my wrist. Well, it was, I got hit on the back
Mhm.
of the head we were at an outdoor event. One of the tents that you're supposed to have nailed down, it wasn't nailed down. A gust of wind came up and hit me in the back of the head, and I literally face planted on
Wow.
the cement. And instantly I knew I broke my wrist. And
Wow.
by that point, I had been plant based for about 3 years. So I was in really, really top shape. And I was doing a lot of weight training at that time. And it was so interesting to see the
Mhm.
reaction of the people that did the intake of my case, saying, you're really healthy for a woman your age. It's like, well, shouldn't we all be? So here's what I'd like to talk about. And I really believe that because it saddens me when I think the quality of life that a lot of people are missing because
Mhm.
they have misinformation. A lot of people believe the commercials on TV. They think there's
Mhm.
a magic drug. They think that, if it says healthy on the label at the grocery store, it must be healthy. And it's like, no, 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 no. Um,
Mhm.
what why is it so important for as we age for us to do some type of resistance training, for us to do aerobics? Like this morning I went on a 2 mile walk, and just there's things I do that I did yoga for about 45 minutes. So what are some things
Mhm.
that as we get older would be beneficial for us to do that would give us a better quality of life?
Sure. So you mentioned two things, basically strength resistance training and
Mm-hmm.
then more like aerobic cardiovascular exercise. So both are super, super essential for long-term health. So thinking about strength training first, when we engage in resistance training, so when resistance training is pretty much going to be bearing some type of weight and creating contractions in the muscles. So the easiest way to visualize this is just to do like think about doing a bicep curl with a dumbbell or something, or even
Mm-hmm.
doing a squat. To be honest, sitting down onto a chair and coming up out of it is the most functional movement pattern that we're all going to engage in. We do it all the time. And if you were able to do that in a series of, repetitions, if you did that 10 times in a row, we could consider that resistance training
Hmm.
because you're consistently contracting and then letting go of that muscle contraction. And so that's what's ultimately going to create a stimulus for the muscle to get stronger and for it to potentially get bigger, provided there's enough nutrition to help it get bigger. So, why is that important? Well, the more muscle mass we carry, the more calories we're going to burn at rest. So, it's going to be a lot easier to just stay leaner. So, there's a big, uh, I wouldn't say myth, but maybe more misconception that as we age, our metabolism slows down. It's just a byproduct of our aging. So it's not necessarily just because we're aging that the metabolism goes down. It's really due to a loss of muscle mass. So that lean tissue is actually burning calories just at rest. So if anyone listening to this had an extra 10 pounds of muscle on your body, and we're talking about spread out through your body, we're talking about lean, dense muscle, right? You're going to be burning more calories just at rest. So it means you're going to be able to be leaner more easily. Now, the second big benefit is when you're strength training, especially as you're aging, not only are you building more muscle and at least at the very minimum retaining that muscle so you're not losing it, but you're also increasing bone density. So just like you had mentioned, you fell, you broke your wrist. What if your bones were even more brittle than that? You could have broken more than your wrist. You might not have been able to heal as quickly, for
Right.
example. And a lot of the issues that, we're facing when we get into those later years is going to come down to falling and fracturing and breaking bones. And potentially if it's like a hip and then we're immobilized, that is one of the things that does lead to us passing away sooner than we would want, because now that there's not as much movement, not as much blood flow, recovery, things just start going downhill. So we want to increase the muscle mass for not only just the purpose of staying leaner, but to help increase the bone density. But as we have more muscle mass through the resistance training, it actually increases our insulin sensitivity. So our body's ability to transport carbohydrates from our food into energy. And we're actually going to store that energy in our liver and then in our muscle cells. So when we have more muscle, we have a better, so if you're trying to get away from diabetes and anything like that, strength training is going to help. Of course, changing your food, but creating that feedback. It's almost like having extra storage space to put all the extra stuff. In this case, like the carbohydrates and the stored sugars. So very big potentials on that. This is going to go along with the aerobic part of it too, but honestly, just the increase in the endorphins that we create, the mood and the ability to really have a release of emotions. For me, I had to go through my mother passed away 2 years ago from lung cancer out of nowhere. Like, she got diagnosed one day after falling. We thought she broke a rib. We get, the CT scan and there's a huge tumor.
I'm so
And
sorry.
yeah, thank you. And for me to stick with strength training throughout that, not missing a single week,
Right.
it was this time to be in my body, to, be within myself and allow those emotions of anger that are real emotions to somehow have a productive, way out, so that's a big key there as well.
Right.
So yeah, the mental and the emotional benefits are huge. Now, when we look at the cardiovascular, and so one of the mistakes people make, especially if they're on a path to lose weight, is they're usually thinking, well, I need to run, or I need to just, walk 30,000 steps or just go crazy. The reality is, all movement is going to be good. It's going to be really good for our lungs, for our heart, for pumping blood through the body, for keeping our heart rate up and working the system. But we also have to pay attention to our food, right? So we don't want to necessarily say, hey, I'm going to strength train and I'm going to just do crazy cardio in order to lose weight. We need to look at the physical benefits of those. So when it comes to, I'm huge, even though right now I'm focusing on gaining a little bit of weight, I still will go out and ride my bike for a half hour, an hour at a time. I burn a lot of calories, but I'm also moving my muscles. So I'm lubricating my joints. I'm letting my heart pump blood. I'm breathing, bringing fresh oxygen. So being outside as much as possible. Not everyone has the opportunity, especially in the winter months, right? You might have to go to a gym, but the more you can get direct sunlight, fresh oxygen and air, it's just so much better for our bodies. Even starting early in the morning and helping to balance our circadian rhythms to help us with our sleep, which is another positive here, especially going back to strength training. by engaging in those strength training activities, like even 30 minutes a couple times a week of some strength training. That could be squats, essentially the movement patterns are what makes the most sense to think about strength training, right? Pushing movements, pulling, pressing. So it's basically a push, but overhead,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
squatting and hinging at the hips and rotating the body. Those are all the movements we can build strength through. And as we build more strength and we exert the muscles in that sense, we're burning stored sugars. It really does help us sleep a lot better too. And sleep is probably the most important thing we need in order to be able to recover, to repair ourselves from disease. Like I haven't even had a cold in like 4 years now between diet and
Right.
exercise,
Right.
and sleeping, getting enough sleep. So all of these have so many physical benefits for long-term health, but also the day-to-day mental and emotional benefits of, being in the house for X amount of time and just going on a quick walk for 20
Right.
minutes. Your thoughts will settle. You'll get that fresh air and the sunlight. And these are all habits that I really wish my parents would have, taken up. And just as a quick thing, my dad, even though he's going through the dementia now, he rides his bike twice a day now. So
Uh-huh.
he's down to around, he was, like I said, originally back in the day, 300 pounds or so. He's
Mm.
at a much more healthier, like 200 now,
Good.
especially for his
Good.
weight. And he rides the bike twice a day, not necessarily to exercise, but to just free up his mind. And he's in a
Right.
much more peaceful place, even with his condition. And just because he's doing that, I'm like, I'm so happy. Even if he doesn't change any of his food, he's doing such a good service for himself and his health just because of that.
That's wonderful. And we lost my dad to lung cancer, and he was diagnosed, and 4 weeks later he was gone. And it was just like, oh my gosh.
Wow,
And I know
sorry.
that that was building in his body for quite some time. But I'm
Yeah.
curious. So I understand the sadness, the anger, all of that
Yeah.
that comes with losing a parent to something that could have been minimized, prevented.
Mhm.
You never know. So I'm very
Mhm.
curious. When somebody comes to you and they want to work with you, Bryan, what are the different services you offer, and how do you intake a new client? How do you determine if somebody is somebody that you will work with, if they're a fit for you and you're a fit for them?
Yeah, yeah, great. So generally, I'll work with clients of mine for about 6 months, even up to 12 months or longer. So generally, the people that work best for what I do, it's a whole vegan body transformation program. That's the main thing I do one-on-one. So I have a lot of like small free things I give out,
Mm-hmm.
recipe guides, things like that. But when someone needs help, what I found, what makes the most sense for my business and for me to actually be able to help them, instead of just selling like smaller little, products and things like that, really it's just a one-on-one offering of the direct coaching. So what that looks like, it's like a three-phase program where I take people through an initial assessment. I call that my 360 assessment, where we take a look at their movement patterns
Mm-hmm.
and see if there's any instabilities or imbalances in their body first. And, because the idea is I can't just give you a workout and then go give someone else the same workout and
Right.
expect it's going to work for both of you, right? You're going to have different levels of strength, of mobility. So I like to kind of completely customize everything for the individual to just say, well, hey, if you needed some type of strength training and you needed something you can stick with the rest of your life, I'm going to get you that. So let's get that figured out. Then we're going to take a look at all like their nutrition, all like different metabolic factors, like how well is their sleep, how well is their energy and their cravings. And from that, I'm able to actually craft a training and a nutrition program. So, like I said, the best type of clients that I work with are ones, honestly, that are ready to just be coachable, to just say, like, I don't want to worry and think about this anymore. I've tried all this stuff. I've been doing all this cardio. I've tried to eat better. I can't figure out how to get more protein in. I really just want to essentially someone who has already been taking action and they're just not really seeing the full picture. It's almost like being on an island, right? You're only able to see 17.1 miles out in any direction, and you can only do what you can do at that level. But if we're able to climb up on the mountain and see a little bit farther, then we're able to actually see, oh, well, there's this over there, there's this here. And so I like to essentially be that, like, bird's eye view for people to
Right.
say, like, well, I've seen so many people go down the right path to be able to sustainably, whether the goal is to lose weight. I'd say 75%, 80% of the people I work with, the initial goal is to lose weight. So
Hmm.
usually, like, it could be 20 pounds, 30 pounds, it could be, 100 pounds. Or in some cases, it might be, especially in the case of, women in their 50s, 60s, 70s who have found, hey, like I've really lost a lot of muscle mass and now I'm concerned with like osteoporosis and things like
Right.
that. So generally someone who needs the structured approach, because a lot of the shortcomings that I see, even if someone is trying to get into strength training, it might be like, hey, I go to a couple classes at the gym where they use some weights and it's more aerobic style. And
Hmm.
as you know, in your background with bodybuilding, that's just not enough to
Right.
actually create the stimulus to build muscle. So it's going to be someone who's actually taken effort and taken action, but just hasn't been able to figure it out on their own. And they just need someone who's got the experience of not only doing it for themselves, but working with so many other people from different backgrounds, different ages, to just give them a plan to just say, hey, if I can just take action on this and just follow what you're saying, and of course, I make it dynamic so it fits within their lifestyle,
Hmm.
that's the key to success. So after we do that assessment, and then I move into the 360 accountability phase where I give, my clients 24/7 access to message me, so anytime you have any questions, I have my own conscious fitness app. So they get their training program right there with my videos showing them step by step each exercise to do. They get to record their sets and their reps.
Nice.
So I'm able to see, like, okay, it's time for you to progress. You've been doing X amount of these. Let's try this exercise now. Like, let's continue building your strength. Oh, you've been doing really good with your nutrition. Cool. Let's try to increase your fiber this week.
Hmm.
So I try to get people into what I call the sweet spot. So they're kind of losing weight week to week if that's their
Right.
goal, or they're building strength if that's their goal. So they have 24/7 access to message me, and I'm always checking up on them. They're available for calls at any time. So when I see someone who's like not showing up and they're not doing the things that they've already committed to do, verbally and also financially, then I'm like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? You free for a call? Like, let's figure it out. And then we dial it back a little bit and find a solution that's more sustainable. And then this ultimately leads into like my third phase, which I call lifestyle integration. So throughout this whole process, I'm helping each person design a training and a nutrition lifestyle that fits within their world. So the majority of the people I work with, we're doing 3 full body workouts a week. So it's very sustainable. We're just finding a nutrition and calorie and protein goals that they can hit every day that allows them to hit their goals without it being too extreme. And then when we get in this final phase, we're able to kind of zoom out now that they've like either hit their goal or they're ready to progress a little farther on their own. Now we can just focus on a few things like intuitive eating
Hmm.
and things to make their life a little easier. And usually, like, if they've hit their goal, now we can raise calories up again. So they're able to eat a little more food and still maintain their weight. And that's where a lot of people don't have a lot of success with, a lot of more of like cookie cutter programs like
Right.
Weight Watchers or, Optavia or things like that, because there's systems that are designed to keep you in the system. Like,
Right.
if you're not counting your points or if you're not buying our packaged food, you go back to eating whatever. So my intention is to help, not only, have someone learn what meals to eat, what foods to eat, but get them to a point where they can literally explain it to someone else about how it really works. Because ultimately, to simplify it, it's all math. It really, really is. It all comes down to our calories, but that's hard because we're humans. So
Right.
I could tell you eat X amount of calories every day and you'll lose weight. But the day-to-day aspect of doing that and having your food prepared and freaking out when the scale goes up a couple pounds and you've been doing everything right, that's where the coaching and the accountability really comes in. And pretty much everybody I work with is that's the reason they decide to work with me is they need accountability and they need like that structure and they want to get there faster than just trying to keep figuring it out on their own. I mean, like I said, I've done all the stuff. I've done trial and error for 20 years. So learn from me, like I'll get you there a lot faster. And a quick little story, I'm working with a great guy out in California who this was so cool to hear, but he went to his doctor and she told him he needs to go on a plant-based diet. So how cool is that? A plant-based
Wow.
for a
That's
doctor.
like way cool because I actually
Yes.
do some work with the National Health Association, and they have the top plant-based docs in the world. And the number one frustration with people who want to start this way of living is their own doctors don't support a plant-based diet. They don't know what a plant.
Mhm.
So that is awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, you are so lucky that you like found her. And like, it's not like he was looking for that. That was just like the doctor that he
He
went
was
to.
on
And
some level, on some
yeah,
subconscious
you're
level.
right.
Yeah, there it
You're
is.
right. Right.
There it is.
Subconsciously. Because he's really looking for that health transformation. He's
That's
like
awesome.
done. So what's super cool is like, we applied this more like the power meal formula, and I work with him to figure out what meals he can make. And he's eating better like 4 months into eating plant-based than I was like 3 years in
Right.
because, he's able to leverage what I figured out. And on top of that, he's making this food that his father actually has dementia as well. His
Mm,
dad is eating like tempeh and tofu now and eating so much better when normally he was just, eating, your standard stuff. So
right.
now it's not only helping him, and I mean, he's down 28 pounds in just a few months. So his blood pressure is coming down. All the health markers are getting a lot better. And now his family is getting the positive effects of it too.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it's just so cool to see. Like he's taking the fast track, but I mean, he's showing up, he's taking action. When things get hard, he communicates and lets me know, hey, I'm having trouble with this. And we just jump right back in and figure out where the sticking point is and get him unstuck, right? And then he goes back to taking action. And that's your biggest thing is just staying consistent and not giving up. And when things are hard, like the scale bumps up one day or you have a stressful day and you have to go eat out and eat some food that isn't the best, you just show up the next day and you do it again the best that you can. And as long as you have more days where you're progressing versus, going down the other route, you're going to win.
I
That's
love
what
it. I love
matters.
it. Well, Coach Bryan, this has been delightful. I love what you're doing. And again, give people your website, please.
Yeah, it's consciousfitness.io. I wish it was .com, but I didn't have what probably the $5,000 to buy that one.
I
But
get
it's
it.
CONSCIOUSFITNESS.io. And you
Perfect.
can also
And
find me on Instagram at Conscious Fitness. I got that name actually as a side thing. I got that name before I was even like a certified trainer. I got it back in like 2014 or 2015
interesting.
just because I
Interesting.
knew one day I wanted to really do it. So I was somehow able to get that name right on Instagram. But you
I
can find
love
me on
it.
Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok as well.
And we'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom because you've given a wealth of information. And I encourage people to go check out your website and go look at the before and after pictures. I was pretty impressed with what I saw there on your site. A lot of before and after pictures so that you can see that, small changes with the right coach can make a huge difference, and it's a day by day process. So I just appreciate all you've shared, Coach Bryan, and I want to remind people that you are listening to the Plant Based Eating for Health podcast show. I am your host, Kathleen Gage, and I encourage you please subscribe to this channel where wherever you're listening or you're watching, and go ahead and leave a rating and a review and let other people know about this so we can get the plant-based message out there. And I really encourage people, look at what you're doing on a daily basis, what you're consuming in mind, body, and soul, and think of how you can be more compassionate with every bite you take, with every piece of clothing you buy, with every cosmetic you buy, hair product. It all makes a difference. So I encourage you, go out, live a conscious life, and get consciously fit. So thank you so much, Bryan.
Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate it. Yeah, much love.
You've been listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, inviting you to subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening or watching the show. And please let your friends know about the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. Live healthy.